my son, Jay Blazek Crossley, who is our policy analyst at Houston tomorrow. I always say that this is, we've been meeting in this room once a month since 1999, which strikes me as being sort of stunning that we've been able to carry this on for so long. And so I'm grateful to all of you, some of you, a few of you anyway, who come regularly, and who knows what it means that this is such a small crowd, but we're glad to see you. So we'll just get going now. We usually go for an hour and a half, and you're welcome to leave if you have to, but about half of that probably is going to be just discussion. So let me recognize, by the way, we have 3 members of our board here today. Thank you. There's Dan Barnum, just walking in, former chair. Barry Goodman, and let's see back here, red tie, and Jay Blazek, who is also my wife as well.
Okay, before we get just in case anybody's wondering what you're looking at, is the Houston region, the people of the Houston region, our current makeup. And a couple kind of ground rules for today. One is, as a white male, who just had a white male son, I believe strongly that white males are part of our region and should be eligible to be elected officials and are good people. Two, I'm really going to be talking about the whole system of our region, and want to make very clear from the get-go that none of the people involved are bad people. I think that a African-American woman can represent a white man in office and vice versa. I'm not saying that any person doing their role shouldn't be doing their role. So we're really looking at the system as a whole. And maybe one other little note, I agree with the statement. Whoever wrote up there, H-GAC rocks. We will be talking a lot about H-GAC and other regional entities. But I think H-GAC is a very good entity, and I'm hoping through this we'll make it stronger. So that is the people of the Houston region. And this is just to start us off. There's 13 counties in the Houston region, and so each county has a judge and 4 commissioners. So of those 65 people, there are 3 women and 6 people who are not white, which is weird. Another ground rule for this is a lot of what I did here was look at who was on these boards and just try to figure out if I thought they seemed to be male or female and what race they seemed to be. So there are undoubtedly a couple people wrong who might actually think of themselves in some other way than how I identified them, but systematically I think the story will hold. And a lot of this is based on what Stephen Kleinberg's been saying for a long time. That we are now the most diverse region in the nation, but he always sort of says we should be realistic that everything in Houston was built for white men, and every institution needs to change and grow, and every institution needs to come to grips with who we are now, and that's what this is about. Our history, I was looking trying to find all these people, and I found this picture of the Waller County judge and commissioner in 1966. And there is, I think we have a great heritage, and we did have a long time ago white men running our region, and they did many good things. But we're in a different world now. So just sort of start us off, Waller County has changed now. Now there's 1 black man there as a county commissioner. But you'll see that this is the people of Waller County, whereas this is the elected officials. not quite a match. And this actually introduces one of the themes, is that to some extent, in certain parts, there are African American elected officials in the region, especially much more than Hispanic elected officials. So that's, and then a key piece right here, you'll see on some of my later slides, that there are no women there. So this is the county judges and commissioners, not all of them pictured. But really, these are the people in charge of our region to some extent. It's 57 white males, whereas, and you'll see on all my slides, this is the elected officials, and then this is the people they're representing. And of all those people, only 3 women. And one of those women, Judge Bilski, is retiring, and there's currently 1 man running unopposed for her position. So this will lose a woman in November. So that is the county commissioners and judges. So you see over here, we have 3 females. This is Harris County is one of the largest counties in the nation, and it's one of the most diverse counties in the nation. And it has 4 white men and 1 African American man. One thing I think is interesting to note is these 2 men have been in their office for over 25 years. Both of these men were appointed to their office originally, and since then have gone through winning an election. And this, Jack Mormon, has the distinction, I think, of being the only person under 40 that you will see on any of these slides. I'm not totally sure. I decided not to really tally age because you can't quite tell. But it's an interesting side note to all this, is that I think he might be the only person under 40 represented in all these things. So that's Harris County, a very diverse county, but this is the leadership of Harris County. Then you have the city of Houston, including the mayor and controller, somewhat more diverse, but still not quite equal to their ratios. So but really the key piece being Hispanic underrepresentation. In a way, Asian, there's 1 Vietnamese American man, and that's about equivalent to the ratio of Asian people in Houston. But there's sort of more white people represented than there are living in the city. But it's one of the more diverse ones of the ones you'll see. So the Houston-Galveston Area Council Transportation Policy Council really decides, I believe this decision-making body probably is deciding everyone's future more than any other decision-making body in the region. Allocating billions of dollars of transportation money every year, deciding where to do it, and essentially deciding how our region grows, whether or not we sprawl more or have walkable urban cities. Those decisions are made at this entity. And so that entity for our region, and our diverse, this is our whole region here. These are the people making those decisions. Which isn't right. What else to know? You'll see a theme here, that there appears to be a glass ceiling in Houston region, that you should never have more than 3 women on any board, apparently. You'll see I found one counterexample, but it was kind of interesting that whatever the size of the body, 3 women apparently appears to be kind of the limit, which isn't okay. The Metro Board of Directors 3 women. But it's actually somewhat more balanced since there's only 9 people on that board. Maybe a little note, this is Harris County, so it's not exactly the metro service area, but it's generally the metro service area. The Gulf Coast Rail District, which to some extent, it does do work on freight rail and things, but it's to some extent a proposal to do commuter rail in the future. So to some extent, this entity hasn't quite gotten to doing what it wants to do. But it is heavily white men. And it generally, it's supposed to represent the whole region. One note about this entity and Metro, for example, and the Transportation Policy Council, is that all of these are not directly elected. So there are various elected officials make the decisions of who gets on these entities. And so, I am not arguing for affirmative action in elections or something. I think the people of Houston should continue voting and electing their representatives. This is different. There are people making these decisions that are not the democracy, not the people voting as a whole making decisions of who ends up on these boards. The Grand Parkway Association, which it's very difficult to find pictures of the people on the Grand Parkway Association, and there are no pictures of their board. So I had to use a picture of the Katy Perry. They're predominantly white males, 1 African American gentleman, and 1 woman. The West Houston Association, very strongly all white males, but 1 African American man, 1 African American woman. But theoretically, if you look at what they publish as their zone, it's actually very diverse. The west half of Houston. The Upper Kirby District, who also couldn't find a picture of. Upper Kirby District is interesting. This breaks the 3 women rule. It's the only entity I found that breaks the 3 women rule. But they are predominantly white. Interesting aspect, though, is the area of the Upper Kirby District is predominantly white. It's different than the region as a whole. And so, I don't know if you would argue that this board is representative of the area that it's supposed to represent. Then, I think one of the other major entity deciding your lives is the Texas Transportation Commission. It's a 5-member commission. They are all directly appointed by the governor, but approved or with consent of the Senate. They are all white men, representing what is now a very diverse state. And these guys are deciding billions of dollars every week, kind of thing. Yeah.
I have a question. What qualifies these people to hold these positions?
I don't know that there are any qualifications to serve on the Texas Transportation Commission.
They're all white Republicans.
They most likely are the party of the governor, most likely are campaign contributors, but I don't know. But these are all, in general, I'm not aware of the Texas Senate ever complaining. So in general, the governor appoints who the governor wants to this commission. And by the way, the interim executive director and CEO of TxDOT is a white male. So TxDOT kind of wins in terms of being all white male in this study. Oh, you missed your quote.
Although, Jay, TxDOT has had women as commission
Yes.
and chairs.
Yeah, and there was the chair of the commission, the most recent chair was a female. But current
About a conservative Republican.
but a conservative Republican, which, yeah. So But that is the current state of TxDOT and the Texas Transportation Commission. So everything I've shown you, all those entities combined, this is their makeup. And another important note is of the executive positions, only 2 women. That would be Mayor Parker and Judge Bilski. And Judge Bilski is resigning, so we will have only 1 woman as of November, unless, I guess, elections happen. One note here, as far as I know, there's only 1 openly gay, lesbian, transgender person. Of all those elected officials, there's only 1. I did a little of the math of there's various estimates of how many LGBTQT people there are. The conservative lowball is there's at least 150,000 LGBT people in Houston. And so they should make up 3% if we were being fair. So one out of 170 is less than 3%. What does this mean? Back to the Transportation Policy Council. So if you live in the Houston region and you are a white, non-Hispanic white person, there's 2.5 million of you, and you're theoretically represented on the TPC by 25 non-Hispanic white people. So you are sort of, for every 100,000 of you, there's 1 vote on the TPC. If you're Asian, Native American, or other, there's about 500,000 of you in the region, and there's 1 vote on the TPC. So that's 5 times less representation. If you're an African American person, there's 1 million of you, and you're represented by 1 person on the TPC. So you get 1 million to 1. If you are a Hispanic Latino person, there's 2.2 million of you in the region, and there is 1 person. This number includes immigrants and native-born. So if we want to only talk about U.S. citizens, native-born Hispanic people, 1.3 million to 1. So this is really the question: is this okay? You know, if we look back, comparing that representation to this representation. As a region, can we keep going like this? So then, back to Dr. Kleinborg quote, I believe that this institution is an institution like many others in our region that needs to transform itself. So I thought that was a bunch of just too much stuff. So here's a picture of my son. I thought we needed a picture break. This is actually was the default picture in the keynote, but there's some kids. I think this presentation is about kids and their future. Here's a cool picture of the train. I thought this was a really nice picture of Houston. And here's a picture from Austin of a B-cycle and a Willie Nelson statue. So what does all this mean? You know, these things have meaning. Race and gender and transportation have meaning. And income. So from our people-powered bike ped survey we did a couple years ago, the zip code you're in is higher income, there are less people walking and biking. So in general, transportation policies that favor driving and subsidize driving are favoring higher income zip codes. And then this is an interesting thing. So this is the percent of cyclists that are female. So in the United States, only 1/4 of the people riding a bike are female. Whereas in countries that are considered have complete streets type, safe, comfortable streets, and have sort of multimodal good transportation policies, women and men ride bicycles the same amount. So this is a real consequence of the way we do our transportation planning, is that women actually ride bikes less than men. And various theories as to basically men are less risk averse, and they're more willing to go ride their bike down West Hyper. than women would be. But if you provide actual safe infrastructure, women will ride bikes just as much as men. In general, older Americans and minorities are at greater risk of dying as a pedestrian. And then in general, if you're, the lower your income, the more likely you are to ride a bus, the more likely you are to walk and bike and do things like that, and the less likely you are to own a car. And so not having all of us in Houston fairly represented in these transportation decisions means that this person's reality is more represented, and the reality they think is important is more favored. So then what do actual Houstonians think? And there was I think, a really important survey that H-GAC did during the H-GAC Region 2040 process. It was over 6,000 people across the region. They think they did a good job of getting urban, suburban, rural, all races and genders into the survey. I don't know like how many people are in your survey.
Numbers, it's representative.
Yeah. Oh yeah, but it's a big survey.
It's a good survey. It was important, but it was not a representative random sample of everybody.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's a key point, I guess, is that Houston Tomorrow is sending out the survey and telling everybody to go take it, and other entities were doing that. But people were asked how much, if you had $100 to spend on transportation, what would you spend it on? And the people of Houston, according to the survey, are actually very smart, smart growth, walkable urban activists, apparently. And the people in general would spend it in a balanced manner. This chunk is fixing existing roads and highways, and this is transit. And then sidewalks and bikeways, and then new roads will get a small chunk. And then safety and planning. So the people of Houston, their vision for Houston is a balanced transportation spending. If you look at male and female respondents, women would spend significantly less on new roads, and slightly more on safety, and slightly more on walking. And then if you look at the race breakdown of the survey, in general, all the people of Houston region kind of agree that they're all kind of together, smart growth, all urbanist activists. But non-white people slightly prefer a little more spending on walking and sidewalks and things. And so then, I guess you can't really read this. There is a series of questions about, is it important to you to preserve the region's ecosystems that we have right now? And then do you agree with these statements? And so, would you want to preserve these things even if it meant higher taxes? Would you want to preserve these things even if it meant less land available for development? And would you want to preserve ecosystems even if it meant limiting roads and things? And this is the main thing that people of Houston agree on, is that predominantly, I think this one is like 70% of people say yes, we want to preserve our ecosystems even if it means limiting development, even if it means limiting roads. But of course, all those things we just said are not what we're doing in the region. This is transportation spending from the TIPs, the Transportation Improvement Plans. So that's sort of a current 4-year plan of what your region is spending. And Houston leads the nation in terms of big cities and what we're spending per capita on roads. So this is, we spend about $330 per person on roads each year. So the current TIP, that's $2 billion a year we're spending on roads at $500,000 a year. $500 million a year that we're spending on transit. So compared to all these other cities we're competing with, we're leading that direction, which is not what the people of Houston report they think we should be doing. And then we also lead the nation in terms of what individual expenses on transportation. The Houstonians spend more on average on transportation than on their own house, which is different than most of the nation. And then in terms of what all these decisions mean, this is a little bit old now, but it's still the same story, I believe. This is the H-GAC map of basically where our region is, and it's basically red and yellow are developed, either commercial or residential, and then green is either farms or open space or somehow still green. So this is 2005, and this is the forecast for 2035, assuming current trends and policies. So all of Montgomery County's green space is gone. Most, the contiguous green space and all over the whole region, gone. And this is what our transportation policies will lead us to. And this is a direct result of transportation policy.
Woodlands are gone there?
The woodlands will have no more woods. And this is the current, this is what our region thinks is going to happen. And our transportation planning is somewhat based upon these maps, which the funny part is these maps assume the current transportation plan. So this map assumes the Grand Parkway and all of the amount of people that will, instead of living in existing cities and areas, will live out. So that's what's happening.
Can I ask, you and David both persuaded me that we're making a shift here, and that the new plans do call for much less road building and more transit, and that's not the case?
Well, there would be, the 2035 Regional Transportation Plan has very good articulated goals. The actual plans that get money in the plan are different than those goals.
A couple things. Great stuff. I'm glad to see this. It's something that many of us are not surprised about. But I think what would be informative, Jay, is it's another study. I don't know who would fund it, but if you took the real estate, banking, and development community boards of directors and applied an analysis of who sits on those boards in terms of your demographics, there'd be a startling similarity between that and the decision-making process going on. If you narrowed it down to who controls all of the money that goes into development, banking, it would narrow it down to even further to a few old white guys. So, what we have here is a nation in general. We're not, there are areas far advanced than ours, even Dallas-Fort Worth, in how they're viewing mobility and investment and trying to balance the imbalance. But as a whole, our nation has the same struggle. We're seeing the last vestiges of white control gripping the death grip. You see it in the attitude towards the president. You see it in everything that's happened. How do we turn the battleship here locally has been a focus for many of us who've been part of Houston Tomorrow for a long time. I've been in meetings today in this very building that are reflective of a disparity between even what elected officials want to see happen outside of Houston. I know the concentration here is Houston, Harris County, but if you go into the region and you take a look at, Metro is 98% of every transit dollar spent in the region, yet their coverage area, the service coverage area, is a relatively small percent of the regional needs in mobility and transit. And so that's a factor that needs to be looked at, because the inability of our region to develop a truly integrated transit network exacerbates mobility region-wide. And there are decision makers in what we'll call the outlying areas of Galveston, Conroe, that want to turn towards transit and are trying desperately, but basically hitting brick walls in terms of their interests. It is because of the disparities that you have pointed out in terms of decision making on TPC. I will also posit to you that 70% of those that sit around that table and vote don't have a clue as to what they're voting on. And this is not to disparage, a commissioner from Waller County. It's just to say that there is a low level of comprehensive briefing and information that takes place that results in a situation which can be changed. If you look at decision-making, one of the things I want to tell you, I think if you look, Houston is unique. It has no zoning, but it has something that is unique to the whole nation. It has more public improvement districts than any place in the country. I mean, 3 times or 4 times as many. Those public improvement districts have boards of directors that I will submit are directly reflective of the demographics within the jurisdiction that they go to Greater Southeast, Midtown, Uptown, and you will see a more direct reflection. And they make decisions that impact their local community with added tax dollars that they're willing to raise, which is a help in terms of sustainable communities and walkability. I mean, they are spending a lot of money on that stuff. What we don't have here, which is hurting us, is a true regional mobility plan that is balancing. We need more roadways, desperately, more tollways. I mean, you've got, if you quadruple the amount of people riding transit overnight from the 2.5, you'd still have massive congestion all over the place. It's got to all be viewed in the context of the transit's doing a job, bikes are doing a job, but it's a fraction of the demand for moving around one way or the other. And I'm not saying it won't do good. It will be a great, it'll save energy, air quality, all of that will be great. But the realism is in our region is the automobile is going to continue to be king in this region long after all of us are gone. And so how can we create options and alternatives for people that want it? And people in these surveys, yeah, if you ask them, would you like a more sustainable, environmentally, what are they going to say? Absolutely. If you ask them, if you tell them if we spend 70% of our funds available in mobility on transit bikeways and stuff, it's going to mean that your commute, when you do it, getting your automobile is going to be far more difficult.
I will disagree with that point.
Okay, well,
developing the Grand Parkway is making congestion worse.
I'm not.
The automobile experience is worse because of the new roads. It's not better.
Because of the tracks.
Because it's the induced development that it's sprawl is the reason. The reason we have congestion is not that our transportation is inadequate. It's because our housing system is inadequate. It's because people are choosing to live in places where they're not close to things and they have to drive too much.
It's also most of our trips every day, including at peak hour, are not about commuting. They're about running errands. And so the majority of people on the I-10 at 5, 6 o'clock are not commuting. But they are being slowed down by people who are just running errands because they're required to use the freeways to run errands because that's how we planned the region, to put all the stuff along the freeways and then to shut off whole communities that only have one collector road in and out and so forth. So that kind of design thing causes a big problem. If you could make it possible for people to run errands not on a freeway. But one time H-GAC had determined that something between 5 and 10% of lowering of the number of people at peak hour would mean congestion would be gone. So it is a very small number.
So congestion pricing.
Well, yeah, sure, but free.
The only successful congestion reduction that sort of is widely known that exists is London congestion pricing. There's no U.S. city that has ever reduced congestion through any amount of road building.
Well, you can reduce congestion on managed lanes. You can keep congestion at a steady state by charging for it.
Well, no, but the entire urban area of London, you pay a toll to be driving at any time.
The city ones.
Well, it's the inner part of the city.
It would be like basically Beltway size area.
But London's got one of the more sophisticated transit systems in the world.
Yeah. But I'm just saying that's the only place that we know that policies have reduced congestion.
And I'll also, the SOV or you can pay to get on our special lane program works well until you face the situation that we're facing in some of our managed lanes where the number of people who are paying for them is slowing down the multiple occupancy travel to a point where, you know, the Katy Freeway, they built a zillion lanes and it filled up within a very short period of time. You're right, you could build 100 lanes and it'll fill out. What I'm saying is that transit and walkability and bikes are a hugely important part of our mobility solution. But we can be wildly successful in those, and still we're going to have a lot of congestion.
And that, I mean, I'm arguing for balance. And currently, we don't have that. Currently, we're vastly outspending the rest of the nation in terms of subsidizing car use. So let me finish real quick. So another sort of way to think of our region is this is the centers here. H-GAC identified as the top 25 job centers in the region, and then I sort of done this map. So this circle is the green area is within 5 miles of such a center. The orange area is within 10 miles, and the purple is 15. So within the 10-mile zone, 71% of all the people in the Houston region and 85% of all the jobs in the Houston region are in that area.
Really, so 70% of everybody?
70% of everyone is right there. And basically the entire economy of Houston is there. And a slight majority is in the 5-mile area. However, so the area outside of that 10-mile area is the one place remaining in the Houston region with a white, non-Hispanic white majority. So 27% of the people in the region outside that area, and 55% of those people are white. And only 15% of the jobs are there. However, 50.34%, a slight majority of all the projects in the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Plan, do not touch this area, the 10-mile area. So a slight majority of the projects that the TPC, that our region is funding, are in this white majority area with no jobs.
Not a lot of land to be developed.
There's a lot of land to be developed. The Regional Transportation Plan, however, calls for 32% of the projects to be in that area. So our TIP is not in agreement with our Regional Transportation Plan in this area. And only 28%, so these are TIP projects, and that's only 28% of the projects that touch the 5-mile area. Whereas the Regional Transportation Plan says that 43% of our projects should be in that area. And then, so that's the TIP. These are what we're spending, these are what the elected officials are spending our money on. And so I believe this is a major loss to the region. This is a huge economic development mistake. So, whereas this is an example of a transportation infrastructure that is designed to go where the people are, the light rail system, which, the 3 lines that are opening this year, but then the old University line and the Uptown line. Which I just noticed the new TIP is out for a draft just now. The Uptown line, which was paid for in the last TIP, says delayed. I don't know what that means. But there's supposed to be a BRT line here.
Yeah, and also the bus traffic transit, the east-west line?
The east-west line, there's sort of, right now there's no, technically speaking, University line is still on Metro's agenda. But right now there's no movement.
Uptown's caught up in some high-level congressional politics right
So Uptown's caught up in some high-level congressional politics. So, but these are examples of investing transportation that will get better bang for the buck and will reach more Houstonians per transportation dollar. This is the Houston Tomorrow Transit Dream. that we came up through the sort of process of a bunch of transit nerds talking for years. So, you know, sort of like Barry, you said, we could, if we did spend all our money, do this. Where would we be? It would be different. There still would be some new roads, you know, in that future, but
it would be an effective alternative mode that would attract a tremendous amount of population using it, that
Yeah.
would reduce a tremendous amount of tons of pollution and save energy, and that's what we should be doing. And we don't have. That's what they're doing in Dallas-Fort Worth. They've got a $30 billion mobility plan. We've got nothing,
Yeah.
basically. And the long-range plan to which you refer, in no way is reflective of how the money is being spent.
Yeah.
I concur on this.
so this is also, I just want to throw in, this is regionally significant transportation infrastructure. You know, having safe neighborhood streets is important to our region. And I think too often, I think like Barry is saying, it's very difficult to plan transportation for a region of 6 million people. Very difficult to get your mind around things. So it's a lot easier to think, okay, we'll spend $500 million on segmenting of the Grand Parkway. That's a thing I can understand. Whereas real transportation benefiting real people, it's a little more difficult and a little more fine-grained. This is another example of good transportation infrastructure, making the streets a little bit safer for walking. Things like this. And then one little element is all this transportation planning has a huge impact on our region's carbon footprint. It is possible to live a lower carbon lifestyle in the Houston region in the places that are the traditional urban form that we had, most of the loop and part of going out west of the loop. There are people in the Houston region who drive cars, but who have much lower carbon footprints than other people in the Houston region.
What's the difference between those two?
And so, sorry, this map is just CO2 per acre.
Oh, per acre.
So this is really per capita. So basically, if you live out over here, most likely you're driving a whole lot more than if you live here. And so this is, I mean, the future I want. More people have access to live in walkable urban places where they, if they do drive a car, they might drive half a mile to a place as opposed to 5 miles.
Jay, what's the building permit differential? If you look at, I mean, you know,
In terms of new building permits?
I mean, do we have a, where's the housing stock? If you don't have places for people to move that they can afford.
Yeah, and that's in general the assessment of Houston, like in terms of urban building, urban housing, that from Dr. Kleinberg's survey, these days about half the people in Houston would prefer to live in a walkable urban place where they can get to stuff in Tarrant County. And then about half people would prefer to have a big yard.
62% of the city.
But the current estimates is about 5% of our regional housing stock is sort of urban. So those half, there's a huge amount of pent-up demand for walkable urban housing, which Jeff Table and I talked a lot about. You know, one of his theories is that it's going to be really hard to do affordable urban housing because that demand is so high that every single unit we put in of any kind of walkable urbanism is going to be very expensive for a long time. And that basically we need 2 decades of expensive urban housing to start having affordable urban housing.
But you gotta start sometime.
But we got to start somewhere.
It's hard to turn down a big house for a tiny apartment.
But unless it means you get to walk to stuff. Just really quickly, I mean, this, to some extent, the Houston Galveston Area Council has some bylaws that say who's on the board. These rules are just kind of made up, you know, at one time. They were intended to kind of reflect a balance between city and counties, and I think I've heard the story that, you know, the city of Houston people who needed to get this NPO started to get federal funding for things knew that they had to kind of let the county people have a little more power to get them to sign on. They needed to have Brazoria County involved to start H-GAC. And so at the very beginning, it was known that the city of Houston was giving up a little power. In terms of exactly what the math is on this, it's really difficult. I have a crazy Excel spreadsheet trying to determine if it's fair representation or not. But the point is this can change. And then this is the General Assembly, and this is the TPC. And I just want to note that the Transportation Policy Council bylaws were updated last January. So these things are updated. So they could be assessed and updated to try to have fair representation.
But it's impossible in the current setup because you have a board of directors that's dominated by that few individuals. To give you an example, the Woodlands community, which has an elected board as their governing board, it's called a township, it's not a municipality, but they have 110,000 people. They've been denied representation on the TPC continually. They can't get a seat. Whereas communities that have a fraction of the population, they all get seats.
Yes, I mean, it's a can of worms here.
Oh, yeah.
And none of those seats want to give up their seat. But is this system fair?
So can I just, you know what, we have to be a little bit careful here. It is true that the counties wield greater power at the board and TPC level. But that's partially true, and maybe entirely true, because the city of Houston has chosen not to play, not to exert a role, and has always voted with the counties to decimate itself. So that could change, you know. I mean, why is it automatic that the Harris County judge becomes the chair of the TPC and the board? Why doesn't the mayor of Houston become?
Well, it's,
And because the city just doesn't play.
well,
They
they
just
do,
don't care.
but I disagree. If you were part, and I know you're part of the process, if you take a look at why we have such an imbalance now, even more so in what's being spent in the transit end of the arena and the highway end of the arena, it's all because of participation by Houston Public Works, which has basically said we don't want transit, we want thoroughfares to be built. Am I right about that?
But that's reinforcing my point.
Well, so maybe, what Houston are you talking about? Are you talking about the elected officials
I'm
of
talking
Houston
about the city
or Public Works of
You
Houston?
know, the last 2 years, not this year yet, but the previous 2 years, all of a sudden around $500 million just appeared in the springtime. Just money that nobody knew it was coming because of biddings. Anyway, there it was. And everybody went crazy trying to get it. Everybody except the city of Houston and Metro. Neither one of them applied for any of that money. And it would have been available to them. But they just weren't even, I sent notes to both the council members who said they weren't aware. This is council members who served on the TPC, that they weren't aware there was money available. They're just not paying attention.
Okay.
And that's a lot of money, you know.
So, I have some recommendations. So speaking of, you mentioned the chair, but the term is actually chairman. So the first recommendation is there should be gender neutral terms for the leadership positions, which I believe the TVC and the H-GAC board have chairmen. And I don't think that's appropriate. I noticed the Texas Transportation Commission has a chair, not a chairman.
Should probably change it.
Yeah, maybe when they had a female chair, that she made it not chairman. So, I think we need to do something about this. I think H-GAC should look at this, should start assessing how it can be more equitable. I know this is going to be a long slog, but back to Dr. Convert's quote, I think every institution needs to deal with this to be stronger. I think the Texas legislature needs to look at COGS and POs. Let me finish these and then we'll,
Yeah, just finish.
so let me finish and then we'll go, because this is the end of these slides. You know, and like you were saying, nobody wants to give up sitting on top of billions of dollars they get to spend however they want. So this might be a case where the Texas legislature needs to look into this. I mean, I think a lot of what maybe we've talked about is what's happening in America is our city regions, are where the important decision making is happening. The decisions here affect us a lot more to some extent than decisions in Austin. And I think maybe it's time for the Texas legislature to recognize that more and make this body more representative of the people. I think county commissioner redistricting is key to this. Texas, our counties are so wildly gerrymandered. It's not okay. And so I think that's something we need to look into. And a key here is urban. There are people living low carbon urban lifestyles in Houston. They don't have a county commissioner district. The way the districts all, they kind of poke into the city, and they're not representative of the urban lifestyle choice. I think there's room for nonprofit governments to just basic democracy. I think a huge part of this is talking to Carol Lewis, is people aren't running, and I think every Houstonian needs to see themselves as a viable candidate for office. And in general, women and non-white people and more liberal people don't think they have a chance running for elected office in anywhere other than, say, City of Houston. So I think maybe just people need to start running with no chance.
Well, people need to start voting.
And people need to start voting. I mean, yeah. So I think we're in need of some basic American democracy here, and people voting and people running. But today, I think, or this year, the various entities that appoint people to the TPC could think about how they happen to be another one of the entities appointing a white male. Those things could change quick. And then there was a Texas Sunset Review of TxDOT in 2011, and the recommendation was that having an appointed Texas Transportation Commission is a bad idea, and we should have an elected Transportation Commission, like you have an Ag Commissioner. So I think it's time. And then there will be another sunset process this year, and I will write my letter saying they should do what they said they should have done in 2011. But on the way, if possible, the governor could consider people who are not older white men for the role, because I'm sure there are people who are qualified. So, back to, I think these institutions need to change, and I think it will make Houston stronger. So with that, there's your question.
Yeah, I don't think
Great
we-
job.
I don't think we need politicians on the board of everything we do. We need people to understand our needs,
Yeah,
what we want.
yeah, and that was one of my,
I've been working on this railroad, trying to get their triangle done here since 1986 when Ben Barnes started. I've been planting little seeds of need all over. We're finally getting one from Georgetown to San Antonio, and we're getting another connection from Dallas to Houston. So we're almost getting there. But we need a master plan, and it's got to be done right. And I've been trying to get H-GAC to do it since 2001. Had everything set up to get it done, and they turned thumbs down on it. We've got to do more studies. Well, I told them 6 years ago that they spent enough money on studies to build a rail from here to the moon and back. That's all they do is study. We got population growing. I graduated from high school in June 1941, just before Pearl Harbor. I'm 90 years old.